На трибунах аллеют знамена, облака в поднебесье плывут. На зеленом ковре стадиона разноцветные майки цветут.
Hello and welcome back to the Russian Football News Podcast. So we're reconvene this week, as mentioned in the last episode, at a slightly earlier date as we are recording ahead of time due to some scheduling issues and mainly vacations that are going to be well deserved by myself and David. And on that note, I am joined today by David.
Hello, James.
And it is just the two of us today because we're going to now go through a similar end of season awards, just the same as last week, but instead of the RPL, it's going to be a slightly more concise and shorter version for purely the FNL. So to first have a little look at the categories, we're going to be deciding on our player of the season. And of course, as a little spoiler, and because you can all probably guess who that will be, the second category will be player of the season who isn't even Sergeev. A young player of the season, the best manager, the biggest surprise, team or player, and the best signing. So to get straight into it, I think I'll jump in myself with Sergeev in that he is, of course, the record breaker. Now is the all-time leading goal scorer in one season in the FNL, both in terms of Russian and Soviet history. And I believe he's got 53 goals and assists in 40-odd games this season, which is just quite unbelievable. I mean, he's one of those players where whenever we mention the FNL throughout the season of the podcast, he is mentioned. I think him and Artem Maximenko are the only two people to kind of make the cover image of our podcast. I mean, David, what else can you say about Sergeev apart from that the base stats don't already tell you about the sort of season he's had?
Oh, it's mad. And the weird thing is he played the first 2 or 3 games of the season for Torpedo before he joined Karelia and didn't score in any of those games. And actually, I remember watching first day of the season, Shinnik against Torpedo, and Shinnik won that game 1-0. And Sergeev missed 2 sitters in that one. So the fact that he then went and scored 40 goals for Karelia in the rest of the season is outstanding. And he's not one of those guys who stat padded it with penalties. Out of that 40, only 5 of them were penalties, compared to say Spurtsian, who scored 16 goals from midfield, but 6 of those were penalties. So he had the odd penalty and actually missed a penalty against Spartak 2, which would have been his record-breaking goal at one point towards the end of the season. But we'll probably run out of superlatives for him. What can you say? 40 goals in a regular league season is just ridiculous. Goals from I remember at the halfway stage I called him a bit of the header merchant. But actually, I did some more investigating, to see actually how he was scoring, and he did score a lot of goals that were from the first touch. Basically, he's from a cross. He scored a ton of goals from crosses. Kabutov, his teammate, had 15 assists this season, and a good chunk of them were for him. But yeah, he was scoring all sorts of goals, largely from inside the box. He is a penalty box striker, but when I started watching Karelia more intensely in the second half of the season, I realised that he could do more. He was able to progress the ball up the field and be a hold-up striker as well. And he wasn't just the guy. They weren't just creating tons of chances and he was tapping them in. He was involved in the build-up a lot as well. So, great season, and we were hoping that he sticks around at Karelia and can do it in the Premier League next season.
Yeah, certainly. I did some little bit of research because we both knew that it would be Sergeev. I think everybody kind of would have expected it to be Sergeev. And at one point during the season, he scored 22 goals in 17 games. And if it wasn't for a 1-0 against Nizhny, which started off the second half of the FNL season pretty much when Zinkovsky scored the winner later on, that was the only game in that run that he didn't actually score in, including a hat-trick against Tekstilchik, and then braces against Akron and Spartak 2 as well, which is just an incredible run. That was his most, the biggest purple patch of the entire season. And I think, I'm not 100% on this, but I've went back from FNL and RPL all the way back to 2002, just going back through the stats, and he's the first person to be top scorer and score more than 20 goals, I think it is, to have 100% of his goal contributions as goals in the league. He got obviously 40 goals and 0 assists in the FNL itself this season, which is quite an unbelievable. Was it 0? Yeah, it was 0.
Oh, 0. I don't know where that's from. I'd actually just had a look on the FNL. It said he had 7 assists in the FNL on the official website. I was trying to remember how many hat-tricks he had this season. I'm desperately trying to look it up now because I'm sure he scored at least 5 hat-tricks this season.
Well, unfortunately, SofaScore's stats aren't then the most accurate because they go through as having 0 assists official.
He got 5 hat-tricks this season per SofaScore, and he didn't get a poker. I thought he had a 4-goal game at one point. But yeah,
so unfortunately,
five hat-tricks in a season where their biggest win was a 7-0.
Well, thank you to the data people at the SofaScore, because that was a good hour and 15 minutes completely wasted that I spent going through all of them lists. I literally got up every single player who was leading goal scorer in the FNL and the RPL and opened up their page and had to look through every year. I got on a transfer market and on Soccerway, and and then went through the lists on SofaScore because they have like a drop-down box where you can go through the years that they've played, and it's a 0 for him. So thanks SofaScore. And on that bombshell, I think we will move on to the next topic, which is player of the season who isn't Ivan Sergeev. So, David, who's your non-Sergeev player?
Oh, it's a tough one. I mean, there's so many players, but I think we have to go for another player who was due to be promoted but now isn't going to be, and that's Dmitry Vorobyov of FC Orenburg. Second top scorer in the league with 24 goals after Sergeev, which is still, a very respectable number. He played for 2 teams. He played for Volgar Astrakhan the first half of the season and scored, I think, 10 goals there. And then when he joined Orenburg, it was, another guy who was in serious purple patch form in 2021. And I think almost rivaled Sergeev for goals in 2021 alone. Sergeev was boosted by the fact that he was so prolific in the first half of the season. But joining Orenburg, a more dominant team, he really thrived. And it's almost a shame, therefore, that they're not getting promoted and he won't go with them. You'd sort of half expect there will be teams looking at him. Orenburg will be able to surely turn a quick profit on him. He's out of the Krasnodar Academy, so who knows whether Krasnodar might go back for him to bring him in. They're looking to do a big turnaround this season. Russian spots, the squads need more Russian players now. With the limit of only 8 in the whole squad, that cuts you down big time, and you are going to have some in there. So I think he's going to be in demand, and he had a good season, which deserved that demand.
Yeah, he's another one of those, like we mentioned yesterday, where Fedotov has kind of done it with Sochi with getting journeyman. I think to call him a journeyman is probably unfair because he is still only 23, but after he was released from Krasnodar, he ended up in the Czech second division. And then at Nizhny, where when he was at Nizhny, he really didn't impress massively. He was shipped out on loan to Volgar, and then Volgar eventually did sign him in July last year before the start of the season. So he's one who has struggled to pick up chances or even chances to play, never mind to take those chances to score. And thoroughly deserves the plaudits that he's getting. And I like his style of play as well, because he's a little bit like Sarvelli in the sense that they're both players who play chiefly in that number 10 role, but are incredibly creative, and you can just tell that they're both kind of playing at a class above. It was like when Kirill Panchenko was down in the FNL, you just knew he was playing at a class above, and I think those two will go and beyond becoming RPL regulars, even if it maybe is towards the bottom of the RPL rather than any higher. But my personal choice for non-Sergeev player of the season, I think is going to have to be Nemanja Pekinovic. Obviously, as people may recognise, the Serbian central defender who was at Lokomotiv for 4.5 years. He joined FAKEL in October when FAKEL were pretty much right down in the bottom of the relegation fight. FAKEL are one of those teams who really suffered in the first half of the year through as you know, David, from COVID. and had quite a stacked fixture list in the second half. So they didn't play a great amount after he joined. But from the moment he joined in October to the end of the season, they only actually lost 4 times in general. And he played every single game, and I think he came off the bench on one of them. But he started 23 out of the 24 games. And just look at FNL's record, where at the mid-season point before the winter break, they were 16th in the table, right in the relegation battle. And they ended it comfortably in mid-table with one of the best runs of form. And a large reason to that isn't just Pekinovic. I mean, their strikers did pick up form. The whole team kind of did play a lot better in the second half, but it was in the first half of the season, and particularly in those couple of months leading up to October, where the defence was all over the place, and he came in, was the leader at the back. I think he was immediately named the team captain, at least not the club captain. Was immediately named the team captain for numerous games, and then kind of led from the back. And I was really impressed by both his performances. And to be honest, I was impressed by FNL signing him, because he's still only 33. He only left Russia, 3-4 years ago now. I think it was 2018-19 that he left. And it was a little bit of a surprise, where he's not quite in the twilight of his career where you would expect somebody to drop down to a lower league. So fair credit to him for going to FNL for the game time, and he's rewarded their trust in him as well. But what's your take on Pekinovic, David? Do you think?
Oh yeah, he was great. I mean, it was a real coup. I know he'd expressed a big interest in returning to Russia, and that was why he was willing to join a FNL club when at that point of the year in October, where Premier League clubs were limited on their foreign players. Obviously, FNL can only have 4 or 5 foreign players, but most of them don't fulfil those limits of 4 or 5. FNL, I think he is their only foreigner, as far as I'm aware.
Do you think he could step up, maybe? Because obviously he's got, no disrespect to FNL, but he's dropped down to the FNL, perhaps with one eye on returning to the RPL one day, and of course they are only 9th. Do you think?
I mean, you look at some of the elder centre halves playing in the RPL, at a mid to lower level, he'd do just as fine a job as some of those, for definite. Stick him in an Akhmat alongside Semyonov or something. That's a very good partnership, and he's arguably probably better than Semyonov.
Especially with where Wilke being released as well and leaving Akhmat, they'll have a foreigner spot freed up at the back. The centre backs in.
It was just I just spat ball any team, but that sort of level of team is what I was thinking. Yeah, where you have an old centre half in there, and he'd do just as fine a job. I'm sure. It'd be interesting to see whether he stays or he's happy there. Voronezh is a fairly sizable city. The club's obviously performing well. I presume he therefore is settled well. It would be interesting to see. I don't know what sort of contract he signed there and how long he's due to stay. But he was surely a big reason for their turnaround this season, and the stats sort of prove it.
Yeah, you could certainly do a job like Rykov at Ural, where Ural aren't massively solid at the back right now. Obviously they shipped 6 against Spartak, and there's a few times where they shipped 3 and 4. But before and after Rykov and Strandberg and their sort of return to Ural and Rykov's move in general last year, they were really absolutely all over the place. They had, Heroyan just says a lot about his level. I'm not a big fan of him. And then players playing out of position constantly. Roman Yamilyanov playing at centre back again, who has never really fulfilled his early promise. And then Rykov kind of came in and just led the line, used his experience. He's slow. He's going to get turned quite easily by a fast player, but he really did bring a lot to kind of unify that Ural defence. And I could see Pekinovic doing that sort of leadership job in the RPL like he has in the FNL as well. And I think, if I remember rightly at the time, I think it was only a 1-year deal, which kind of tends to be the general sort of contract handed out to foreigners in the FNL because of the financial instability. But I would have to double check that, because off the top of my head, I can't remember, to be honest.
Yeah, you'd assume so. You'd assume he's on bigger wages. I mean, they've got a small club, a small squad in general. So it'll be interesting to see what happens.
So if we move on to young player of the season, which to be honest is incredibly difficult with the FNL, of course, with the Limitchik rule, which actually forces clubs to play a certain amount of younger players. There is a whole host of them that really impress throughout this year. And I think for me, the one man who, well, spoiler, we'll get onto the Sport Box FNL teams of the season later on, but he wasn't named in either of them, and that's Krasnodar's Edward Spurtian. Now, Spurtian has played in the Champions League this year for the first team, as well as majority of the time spending playing in the FNL for the Krasnodar 2, but he has 20 goals and assists this season for them, and what's been quite a disappointing season for Krasnodar 2. Now, whether or not I think they should be in the pyramid is a whole different matter, but he has been their standout player and sort of creative fulcrum and the tip of the spear, all those sort of usual platitudes that you hear from a player who scores a lot of goals and creates quite well. That is him. He's a real all-round striker, and I've been thoroughly impressed by his development this season in the team. But David, I believe you've got a different name in mind for your young player of the season.
Yeah, I mean, as you said, there's a whole plethora. I mean, we talk about the limit shoot rule, and it's working. Just for a quick basis, last year, FNL clubs used 141 under-20 players in their matchday squads. This season, they have used 214, so that's 73 more in a one-season growth. And if you take that up to under 23 players, it's like 200 extra. So there's definitely progress, and it's I think it's clear that the FNL is becoming a younger league. There's definitely been more emphasis put on using it as a talent pool, as a development pool, and we're seeing results. Makarov's in the national team, Smoshnikov's in the national team. 2 years ago, they were both playing in the FNL. So yeah, it's promising signs. But yes, back to my choice. Tough one, and I sort of feel hard doing this because he's only really featured second half of the season, or he has only featured second half of the season. It's Nikita Krivtsov from Tomsk, only 18 years old, and came on loan from a PFL club, Torpedo Vladimir. Never featured for any Russian youth team in his whole career. Just come through the academy at his hometown club, joined Tomsk on loan, and in 15 appearances scored 4 goals and 5 assists from a sort of box-to-box midfielder, occasionally playing wide. A very free role he was given there, and he's been rewarded with an 21 call-up as well. Statistically, I mean, I started watching Tomsk every week because of him, because he was such a fun little player to watch. Those are the players that catch your eye the most, obviously, and I've had it with last year with Urunov and Kvicha in the Premier League, and statistically he stands out when it comes to chance creation, ball progression. He's up there with the best in the league this year, and he's only 18, and this is his first time playing at this level. So he really impressed me, and he was the guy. I might have gone for Ilya Burkovsky had he carried on his first half of the season for him. He was fantastic for Torpedo first half of the season. Yeah. Lokomotiv signed him in January, along with Nikitin from FAKL. They loaned Burkovsky to Nizhny Novgorod, and I'm fairly certain he was then injured. I think he played twice then, between January and the end of the season. So really unfortunate, because he was a hot commodity in January, and that's why Loco went and picked him up. And he was showing real promise. Very talented attacking midfielder. I'll also give a shout out to Misha Ignatov from Spartak too, who was phenomenal particularly in the second half of the season, and just showed that he should be in and around the first team squad at Spartak. He is really immensely talented, and he deserves a chance now. I think he's just turned 21, and to be fair, last game of the season I think he got 20 odd minutes against Akmat there. So yeah, those are my picks. Three young attacking midfielders, really. But Krivtsov, the standout.
Yeah, and on Ignatov, I think he's been absolutely brilliant for Spartak too this season. But he did get a little bit of a chance not a massive one, but he did get a chance a couple of years ago playing for Spartak, but then he kind of fell out. I think he fell out with the coach at the time. I can't remember exactly the reasoning why. I know it was when Kononov was in charge. He got his debut under Kononov, and if I remember rightly, I'm sure he fell out with Kononov. Yeah, and
I mean, there's certainly talk. I've heard talk that he's maybe a bit of a live wire. No, is that the right word I want to use? I don't know. He can be quite frictious, as far as I'm aware. And I think he did get at least 2 red cards this season, straight reds for some quite bad challenges. He seems to be maybe a bit of a hothead, but in terms of raw talent, he's got bunches of it. He just needs to sort out the rest of his game. Really, it would seem, and maybe just age will do that. Just maturing. Hopefully, he'll just mature as time goes on.
Yeah, and for when he did score, it was against Yense away in 2018, and to just tell some of the Spartak fans who else was playing that day to say how long ago he got the job. He got his debut. I mean, Salvatore Bacchetti was in the team, Fernando and Zilovic and Hani, and I think it was just when Maximenko got his debut as well, and Raskasov. So that's how far back we're going. When he just turned 18, he first got his full debut and scored around that time. I mean, he played against Rapid Vienne and Villarreal in the Europa League that year in the group stages as well. So he was very really highly rated.
In one of those games as well, I remember. I remember when he had that breakout period, the main thing everyone noticed was that he was really skillful on the ball. And, he scored some fantastic solo goals this season in the FNL. There was one he scored against, I think it's Chaika, where he took on 5 or 6 players and then stuck it top bins with his left foot, on the turn. It was an unbelievable finish. He's really come on, and I hope he can sort himself out and get himself a chance in the first team, and if not, go to another Premier League team who is going to give him that chance, because I think he's good enough for it.
Yeah, I think it was he got his debut against Rapid Vienne when he came on for Tikhonov after Timofeyev scored the own goal, and then he played really well a couple of games later against Rangers and they drew 0-0, and I think he started that match and he had a really good game. But it's good to see him sort of rekindling some of his form, because I know he was quite disappointing last season in the FNL compared to how he has been this. But if I was going to mention 2 Spartak names as well, just as a quick little honourable mention, is Daniil Denisov and Stepan Oganessian. Denisov's played in 30-odd games this season for Spartak. He hasn't got a goal or assist, and he's not the most creative player. He is very much a deep-lying midfielder and a bit of a water carrier for Spartak, but he's still only 18, playing 30-odd games for the second team. So with obviously Ayaz Guliev being released and Marie Vittoria set to take charge, who is known for giving youngsters a chance, I wonder if Denisov might be one of those ones that you could keep an eye on in the future in Spartak. He's also got a few red cards this season. There's quite a few characters down into the Spartak 2 team who are a little bit rash, but I think that's because a lot of them are really getting the debuts when they are 17, 18. Denisov, I think, made his debut when he was 16 even, against Chitanova a couple of years ago. So it was... Maybe it's just the lack of experience and raw age, but Oganessian as well has been brilliant for them. He's kept... Alexander Tashayev, obviously people remember that name, is the guy who broke through the scene on Dinamo a couple of years ago and moved to Spartak. And it's been nothing but disappointing. Oganessian's kept Tashayev completely out of his role, and also Pedro Rocha as well, both players who prefer to play off the left. Oganessian started again over 30 games this season for Spartak 2, and it's been absolutely brilliant as well.
Also scored some really good goals. He's one of the group in the under-21 squad. I think we should just go through and say, of the new gen under-21 squad, we've got Botnar, Borisko, Akatsev, Ruslan Litvinov, Agapovs, Chernikov, Ignatov, Krivtsov, Oganessian, Kosarev. That's 14 players who have all spent the season in the FNL, called up, and most of them still are at FNL, even if a couple of them are on loan.
And a lot of them have already played RPL football as well. Oganessian was only a couple of minutes. I think he came on in that win against Khimki. Him and Mokitasov came on very late, but it just shows
Litvinov's had a good few appearances as well. for Spartak off the bench, I'm pretty sure. Chernikov's had a couple of games for Krasnodar. Kosarev had a few at Rubin. So yeah, there's a big pool there of loanies and FNL genuine players who are going towards that next generation. I think it's signs that the new rules are actually doing some good.
I'm not sure on the figures 100% on this, but I know that the FNL has got a massive percentage of youngsters who are players who are under the age of 23 that play, obviously thanks to the Limichik rule, but also one of the higher percentages of lower divisions in Europe of Russian nationality. Of course, that's largely because of the fact there's a very, very strict foreigner limit and even stricter and more difficult financial problems to try and navigate. But it's only a good thing for the lower, younger tiers and the first team in Sponaya side as well in the long term.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if we move on to manager of the season, I don't think anybody will be surprised in what my choice is, and of course that is Osyenkin at Krylia. He led Chitanova to almost the top 4 last season. He was signed by Krylia in the summer as part of that sort of exodus out of Chitanova, where 8 players and the manager all went to Krylia. He was obviously aided by that, by the fact that a lot of these younger lads have played together for a very long time, have played under him for quite a long time, would be able to adapt quite easily. But he's also managed a big squad. I mean, Krylia is the biggest in the league by quite some distance. And players that he's never played before. Big players who've got bigger names as well. I mean, Nikita Chilnov is a prior and RPL regular. Zinkovsky as well, who's a very big name and kind of broke on the scene in Krylia when they got relegated. He's managed to stay at Krylia and he's moulded them all together in what is such an unbelievably efficient unit. They got over 100 goals last season and ran away with the title. So I think I can't really look beyond Osyenkin. There's also some question marks over others in and around the conversation, David.
Yeah, I mean, you got to give praise to the Orenburg coach, Lichka from the Czech Republic. A foreign coach in the FNL, and he did a very good job with them. We can't ignore them. They rightfully got a top 2 place, and while Krylia ended up with 101 points, Orenburg had 94, which is still a big total to get to. But I think as much as he's a bit of a wild character, we got to give some credit to Spartak Gortnev of Alania. Alania were one of the 6 teams who came up last year from the PFL, and they had an amazing season and came in the top 4. First season at this level in quite some time. Obviously, former RPL side, but the squad's largely built up of players from their home region down in the Caucasus. A lot of young players, very young squad. I think his son has even been on the bench a couple of times. And they went out there and played. They scored a ton of goals. They had a couple of players who racked up. Baturez Gertziev got 8 assists and 13 goals this season, which is a very impressive tally from midfield. The only downside from his season was when there was a big brawl just after the restart. I can't even remember who they were playing. There was a big brawl, and he and Kitag Kosonov both got suspended for at least 4 games for being involved in said brawl, which involved other players and the referee. And I think we all sort of knew he was a hothead from his career. We saw him play for Siska and Ural over the years, and no surprises. But he's a very young coach. He's not even 40, and he's having his team play good football. His young team playing good football. So got to give him some credit for doing well. Stukalov would have been up there, I think, from Velez as well, but they did fall off, and obviously then he left to Ufa, and did a very good job with Ufa. So clearly he seems to be a good coach, but I think Gogniev deserves some credit.
Yeah, certainly. And although they were relegated this season, I would like to mention Sasha Kerzhakov, of course, who's just left Tom at the end of the season after they were relegated into the PFL. It's kind of widely known and famous through Russian football circles that Tom are constantly skint, like they're constantly battling any form of financial survival. They've got quite a young team, small squads, and they of course have the geographic issues that they always have. That pitch there is at best playable for like 4 months a year, if that. And Kerzhakov almost kept them up with a very good run of form, and he's kind of, I think they're only 1 point behind Akron in the end, and with Tambov's implosion, it's expected that Akron will stay up in the FNL. So fair credit to Kerzhakov. Of course, he didn't win it because ultimately Tom were relegated, but it seems to be that him and a couple of the youngsters that he's gave debuts to this season have really came out of this season with the reputation intact, and he will almost certainly manage an RPL team one day if he keeps up this kind of form.
He's been highly linked, isn't he, to Nizhny Novgorod?
Yeah.
The job there. Well, obviously they are going up, so who knows? But yeah, he was great with that young squad. He came from, what was he coaching? The under-17 national team, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Signed up a lot of young players from RPO clubs on loan and from below, and yeah, they only lost 4 times after the restart. That was 16 games. Their downside was they drew quite a lot. The big killer games were they drew against the Akron and Krasnodar too, who were both their relegation rivals. They win one of those, that's it. They're up. They would have stayed up.
Yeah.
So yeah, disappointing, but he did do a very good job with them. Yeah, there in the second half of the season.
I think it was the under-19s he came from, because I think he worked his way up. A couple of the lower levels of the national team.
I can't remember,
but yeah, it was a very much out of the blue. And to be honest, it was. I think a lot of commentators at the time, obviously, some were saying, "Oh, he's a legend. Of course, he'll do well." But it's not easy for someone in their first club domestic job to go to a place like Tom, because Tom are a little bit of a crazy club, as we all know. Last time they were in the FNL, they're still dealing with the after effects of that relegation. So with the long-term financial issues more so that have really plagued them, and then they were particularly badly hit and had difficult time with the COVID outbreak as well, Tom. So fair credit to Kerzhakov, but of course, unfortunately, didn't quite keep them up. So isn't manager of the season for me anyway. Biggest surprise team or player. I think my biggest surprise has got to be Alania. Alania, of course, finished 4th in the final table, and it's good to see them back. Oh, well, a Phoenix club version of the old Alania Vladikavkaz back in near the top of the FNL anyway. They would have took part in the playoffs this year if it wasn't for, of course, the issues regarding the FNL licensing debacle, and basically because they and Orenburg and a couple of others, but mainly because they and Orenburg were denied licenses. The new regulations are that by default, 13th and 14th in the RPL, Arsenal, Tula and Ufa will stay up automatically without the playoffs. So it is a shame for them, because I think alongside probably Krylia, they've played some of the most exciting football this season. I know Nizhny have got nearly 70 goals, but a lot of Nizhny's is kind of backs against the wall counter-attacking stuff, long ball up top to Suleimanov. But Alania's like it's kind of like just go for it and enjoy yourselves. They play some really, really good stuff, and I think young Magomedov is going to be one to keep an eye on in the future. I say young, I think he's 23 now, isn't he? but yeah, they came obviously promoted from the PFL last season, and they did a Chertanova. So with any luck, they can sustain it in a second season and hopefully do a Rota Volgograd and bring a little bit of pride down to South Ossetia again. But David, you're surprised this season?
Yeah, I mean, I'll go for one of the other promoted clubs, which is Velez. We mentioned before they were right up there. Freshly promoted. They got a tiny budget playing in Moscow there. Some of the players they signed, like Maiga, was just before that. He was I think he was selling lighters. I think they said he was just selling lighters in Moscow, playing in the Seven-a-side league, and he's now one of the guys being linked with a move to Ufa. Stukalov went and joined Ufa towards the end of the season. He's allegedly going to go and grab 2 or 3 guys from Velez to take with him. They dropped off a little bit second half of the season, but they still finished 8th. And at the halfway stage, were right up with a shout of making the top 4, which for a club, I don't think, when clubs come up, they're not supposed to do that well. Two of the Premier League teams came in the top 8 of the league. That's tremendous, and considering how much smaller they are and new, Velez are a new club as well. They're a real surprise. So yeah, they're my pick.
Didn't know that he was selling lighters in the streets of Moscow before playing.
Yeah, something like that. Like he was just one of those guys. He said he would just stand outside the metro and was selling. I'm sure it was lighters. Yeah.
That's a brilliant scouting. That's the sort of move you would expect Gazizov to make, something bizarre like that. But is Galoyan one of the ones that are linked to be joining him at Ufa as well, or not? Or is he's been linked elsewhere, hasn't he?
I think. Yeah, who is it? Botaka, one of the centre halves, was linked to Ufa, and Ruslan Fishenka, who's a young midfielder. So they're always 3 young. Maiga's like 25, but the other 2 are both 21, I think. So yeah. But Galoyan has, he's talented and has been linked elsewhere.
Yeah. Well, I like with Stokalov as well, is he's done that typical FNL thing where he's grabbed together lots of players who've been dropped down from the bigger academies. I mean, saying that, that's a high percentage of young players in Russia right now. But Lasana and Dai was dropped by the Cisco Academy, and Velez picked him up, and he's had an excellent season. He's still only 20 as well, so it's good to see him getting the best out of what is another young squad, and again, just clear evidence that the limit check rule is, and the new structure that they're moving towards is really working. Because if I'm not a big fan of the foreigner limit, we all know that. I think none of us are, to be fair, but this youngster limit is, you can see that does set a clear pathway for development. You can see why that would benefit both the clubs domestically and the national team, because it allows players to get playing men's football at a younger age, and more players be given that real chance. Because most of the time, a difference between discovering one player and another player kind of falling away and out of the footballing career is sometimes just getting playing time, just being given that chance. So absolute fair credit to the FNL and the regulatory authorities there for bringing that through, and the RFU, of course. And I believe, David, here's an interesting one. Do you know obviously the PFL is rebranding to be the FNL 2 or whatever the full name will be. Hasn't been fully decided, has it? The limit check regulations are going to follow, isn't it? I presume.
I don't know, actually. I think the PFL have.
They have their own.
They're going to have even stricter rule. I think PFL's last time there was something proposed. It was like PFL clubs were going to have to use like 3 or 4 under 21 players, whereas the FNL only need to use 1. So I think there was going to be even more emphasis on youth at the PFL level, which is, it's odd. It's weird in a way, because then what happens to older Russian players? Do they lose their value? Do they gain value at a higher level? If a 28-year-old's not good enough for the FNL, what's going to happen? Is he going to retire? Because he might not be, such an important signing at a lower level for those guys who, they're semi-pros, but they get bribed. I presume they get by as a job as a footballer in the FNL or the PFL, just about. Yeah. It's an interesting situation. I mean, it shouldn't be too strict, but there will be players who are forced out who are, I'm sure if you go and look at I don't know, just any random PFL team, there'll be a bunch of older guys in there who might suddenly lose their value.
Yeah, like Vitaly Diakov at Spartak too, who's been there forever. But I feel sorry for those players, but I feel like this is a easier and a larger step towards financial stability, which is probably the biggest issue plaguing the PFL in particular. Because these players are going to demand lesser wages by quite some distance, especially when you have some of the FNL journeymen who've been around the block for quite some time. They'll be easier to negotiate with, and the agents should be easier to negotiate with in theory anyway. But like these guys who are maybe going to get dropped off, then what about players who were playing for, say, Angie and Amcar and so on, they all get dropped off, and they'll filter. Most of them will filter out elsewhere into different teams, into different pyramids, probably jump borders across to like some of the old Tambov guys did, where there's quite a few of them ended up in Moldova and Belarus. It's not ideal, but there is routes out there for these players to go elsewhere. It is a bit of a shame that they will be getting forgotten about, but I think at this juncture, financial stability is quite an important thing to try and thrive for the FNL and what the FNL 2 will be, whatever it's actually going to finally be called. But we'll finish off again by the best signing of the season, and it is cyclical, of course, because I think best signing for me has to be Ivan Sergeev.
Yeah, I mean, we just say the best transfer window of the season and just say Krylia. Because, I mean, Sergeev plus the Chertanova group, I mean, they definitely had the best window, and it's a given to give it to Sergeev, really. So, yeah, no-brainer.
On that, I mean, we've had all the expletives we've went through all his stats earlier on. It's just kind of, you have to just once again just appreciate the level of performance that he's put in this season, and hopefully he can, for Krylia, can carry that on. But to finish off, just before we do leave yourselves and we will return next week for the team of the season, David, do you want to look through some of the Sport Box's fan and expert team of the seasons for the FNL?
Yes, I shouldn't have closed the link.
I was going to say you closed it, didn't you? I've got them here.
One sec. I've got it back. I'm back. Okay, so they did open voting on their website for team of the season, and then they also picked their own team of the season. And there's a fair bit of crossover. So the fans' team of the season was Soldatenko of Alania in goal, Polyukhov of Krylia at right back, Pacinovic of Fakel at centre half, alongside Soldatenkov from Krylia at centre half, Malyarov from Nizhny Novgorod at left back. In centre midfield, we had Sapeta from Nizhny Novgorod and Magomedov from Alania. On the wings, we had Krylia's Yezhov and Zinkovsky. And up front, we had obviously Sergeev and Vorobyov. And the experts team of the season from Sportbox was Gorodovoy, who played for SKA, Khabarovsk and Velez Moscow this season, in goal. Malich from Orenburg at right back. Pacinic from Fakel, Gotsuk from Nizhny Novgorod at centre-half, Yuri Goshkov from Krylia at left-back, Sapeta from Nizhny Novgorod and Ignatov of Spartak 2 in midfield, Gutsiev of Alania on the right wing, Zinkovsky of Krylia on the left wing, and then that two up front again with Sergeev and Vorobyov, which, they're fairly good teams. I don't think we could disagree with much. Spurtsian, very hard done by, and a couple of the strikers who aren't there, hard done by, but they can only have so many people in there, and there was a lot of good players this season.
Yeah, certainly, and this is in lieu of doing our own FNL team of the season. We, unfortunately, due to the Euros and the short break with the Euros being delayed from last year, we are running out of time to try and, because we wanted to focus a full episode on the team of the season for the FNL. So we thought we'll get this one out of the way and do a little awards show for them. But next week we will be back with the RPL team of the season. I think it's probably going to be a little bit of a long one again. They tend to be our longest episodes just about in terms of the time, because there's just so much to get through. We promise we won't spend 40 minutes discussing Zenit's defense this time and then 40 minutes the rest of the team like we did last year. But anyway, on that bombshell, we'll end, and I'll see you at the usual time next week. This has been the RFN Podcast. Goodbye for now.
Идет футбольный матч, летит над полем мяч. Веди его, беги, точнее его ударь. Но мяч берет в ноги решительный вратарь. Не напрасно футбольное поле самых ловких и смелых влечет. Здесь нужны тренировка и воля, быстрота, увлечение, расчет.